Yeah.
And so I love thinking about the leadership problem, the people and change problem, and then the systems and structures problem. They're all kind of different ways of understanding it and tackling it.
Yeah, it's great. And I was reading, Tim Keller did an article years and years ago, probably back. Well, hello and welcome to the Church Office Podcast. My name is Gavin Smith, and it's a joy today to welcome you to our administration, admin and ops podcast. We love talking about leadership. We love talking about the work behind the scenes in church life. And we've got a special guest on today. Really pleased to welcome Scott Sanders to the podcast, mate. Thanks for coming on.
No worries. It's great to talk and think about all things leadership and church.
Mate, I love it.
It's a thing that I'm keen to talk about.
He's passionate about it. You'll notice the accent. So Scott is the executive director at Reach Ministries in Australia. Tell us a little bit about the work, Scott. What are you involved in there? What does that mean?
So Reach Australia has a vision to see thousands of healthy, evangelistic, multiplying churches. We started about 15 years ago with a desire to work in the church planting space. So to see hundreds of new churches evangelized into existence. So there's a real focus on getting alongside church planting couples, church planters in that pre-launch phase, thinking about whether they're the right person, checking their plans, understanding if they've got the resources, helping them find money, giving them a coach, and then helping them in those first few years move towards survivability. So to launch strong, and then to have a church that can start moving through the growth barriers. So employing a second worker, moving past 125, and continue to have that evangelistic energy. So that was, Reach Australia really births out of that desire to see multiplication, to see new churches evangelized into existence. And then about 5-6 years ago, church planting was kind of, it wasn't all the low-hanging fruit of all the young guys who got fired up to plant churches through, Mark Driscoll and Tim Keller and others. That kind of slowed down, and so we realised we had to actually work back into the system and help established churches become healthy, so that we could actually move them, help them move towards multiplication and starting new congregations, starting new churches. So in some senses, I don't think the vision's changed. The vision is still wanting to see multiplication, to see church planting happen. It's just we're now working with those pioneering leaders, and we're also working with the established church and trying to, wake that up, give energy to it, to see it actually become healthy and move towards multiplication.
Mate, it's great. And I love the way you're talking already, just multiplication, serving leaders, church planting. This is our heart at the church office, and part of ours is to come alongside people and help in that kind of real admin and ops section, and which is a challenge for church planters and things. Now we've linked up, and you've linked me up with a lady called Sam Jensen, who's doing similar stuff in Australia. And if you've been listening to the podcast before, you'll know we've talked to Richard Cokin before in Reach Ministries UK, and these guys are launching a whole range of new stuff. And again, you're working to help and develop them in so many different ways, Scott, which is wonderful. Now, before we jump into our conversation a bit more, I just want to do a quick shout out to our sponsors, Church Suite, and they've recently come into Australia, haven't they? Really, to serve you guys a massive database program.
Yeah, Gavin, Paul have been great. They've had a real desire to listen to churches and their needs, and listen to the kind of peculiarities of an Australian church context, just with our safe ministry and our kids ministry and just our way of doing things. And so I love their heart to get alongside churches in that really important database space, which is all about actually loving people, all about actually helping to see people be followed up well and enfolded into church life. So Gav and Paul have been wonderful partners, and again, there's lots of different database systems. A church has to have one. You can't get by with a piece of paper and an Excel spreadsheet. But these guys really love the church, which I love.
I appreciate that as well. Gavin is massively passionate about the gospel, passionate about local church ministry, and has just been a blessing to us at the church office in sponsoring the podcast. But he's also been able to sponsor and invest into us in terms of, we're just about to kind of launch in the next couple of months a good church management course, just to help leaders think about right, what do we need to be doing in the background, and they may not do all the work in the background, and it may be an administrator, but just having that whole space, just talking about good governance, good policy, staffing, all the things that churches have to do when you get to a certain size. It's really interesting. Scott, you must have been switched on by some of this as you go, because I've over the last few weeks I've done a whole load of reading about churches of 50 and how they progress to 100 and the awkward sizes and the changes that have to come and all that development stuff. Mate, you must thrive on that kind of conversation as well.
Yeah, the growth barriers is it's a really interesting one because it's complicated in the sense you can kind of just look at it as bums on seats, but at the end of the day, we're talking about people, and
Yeah,
we're talking about churches that have different traditions and ministry contexts and leaders with different capacities and wirings and giftings, and then just different growth dynamics just in the place. Like an inner city church versus a new growth, edge of the city suburb versus an old area that hasn't versus a rural area, where kind of just continuing to maintain is actually a positive thing. So I love that it's a complex problem,
yeah,
and you need to think about it, biblically and theologically. You need to think about it relationally. You need to think about people and structures and systems and resources. So it's a you know it's a complex problem that I think just requires you to be thinking around it very, just forces you to push into different areas,
yeah,
and that kind of gets me curious and asking questions,
yeah,
and kind of not being happy with sort of status quo. Churches, I think healthy things grow.
yeah,
Healthy things also die and need to be replanted as well.
yeah,
And healthy things need to be shut down sometimes and stopped. But for the most part, a healthy thing grows
yeah,
and pushes past those growth barriers. And
yeah,
so I love thinking about the leadership problem, the people and change problem, and then the systems and structures problem. They're all kind of different ways of understanding it and tackling it.
yeah. It's great. And I was reading Tim Keller did an article years and years ago, probably back in 2006, just
Mm.
talking about growth and talking about being kind of small church mentality, big church mentality, and how you want to try and project and see where you're going in the future to be able to go, right, what do we need to set up to build that? And that question of kind of in the growth bit and that middle bit is interesting. Right, we need to start thinking differently and putting in different structures, even though we might not be there yet, but we want to grow into that. And I guess there's in the UK, there's a lot more kind of thinking, a lot more strategy. Leaders are needing more help in this kind of area because they're faithfully doing ministry, but are going, we don't seem to be growing, or we don't seem to be moving past some of those thresholds. And I know Reach Australia has a whole bunch of tools and resources and things that you're doing. Fill us in, Scott, on some of the stuff that you're doing with leaders.
Yeah, well, at its core, both with the church planning work and the established church revitalisation work, the key thing we do is actually coaching, getting alongside leaders,
Mm.
and we've got a network of church leaders who are wanting to see churches started and churches revitalised. So our coaching network is leaders who have planted churches, leaders who have been through the development program, who again want to see healthy, evangelistic, multiplying churches. So at the core of what we do is actually marrying up people with other, with church coaches and church leaders who have seen or experienced similar, growth challenges, exist in a similar context. So at a core, what we do, coaching. I always say, if we did nothing, we'd still be doing coaching, because for me, it's the accountability relationship. It's the someone who's walking alongside you, helping you problem solve, and helping you think outside of your own kind of understanding. It's someone who's getting alongside as a cheerleader. We're not really used to doing that in the English and the
Yeah,
Australian scene. That's kind of more an American thing. But I
yeah,
but I actually think you want people who are for you, and I think it's actually really good for the coach as they see um, that church grow as a result of that. So coaching's really key. Uh, we have a number of development programs that we do with the senior church leader, and then more recently we've developed a team development program, which is for the whole team to come along.
yeah,
Both of those really focus on helping the church leader think about what's involved in leading themselves. So actually helping them, think about how they're wired, how they operate in the team, how they operate with their leadership group, their elders, deacons, or their
yeah,
parish council or their vestry, um, and also then helping them think about how they actually lead teams, and then lead church as organisation. Because I think we often we view church as family, We have these kind of organic kind of models, but church is an organization. It's a body. It's a temple. It's a system,
Yeah.
and so we help church leaders also think into the systems that are part of church, and how do they influence them? How do they think about that next size barrier? I was chatting with a church leader in the UK. He kind of gave me that a helpful illustration. He talked about kind of growth barriers and sizes of churches. Similar to thinking about kind of kids and their clothes.
Okay.
If you've got a 6-year-old, you don't buy kind of clothes for a 6-year-old because you know that they're going to grow. You buy them as if they're an 8-year-old, knowing that there's a little bit of wiggle room and they're going to actually grow into them.
Yeah.
So I think having that kind of growth dynamic, that forward thinking, which I think is really hard for a church leader to do because you're so caught up in the 7-day cycle, you're so caught up in kind of next Sunday, to actually help leaders stop, pause, reflect, and think into the next 3 years, the next 5 years. I think is a really useful kind of thought exercise, but a really useful exercise that actually pushes churches to be thinking not just about their own barns and think inwardly, but actually think about the fields and think about the growth opportunities that are out in front of them. So they're kind of some of the key things. And then we've got our planter stuff where we assess and coach and provide a boot camp and a marriage retreat.
Right.
We get alongside church planters and throw everything in the kitchen sink at them,
Yeah.
because church planting is hard work. To get it off the ground requires a lot of energy. So we want to kind of give it good launch velocity so that it can grow and then push past the 75 and the 125 and the 200 growth barriers that you see, in the church planting landscape.
Yeah. And Reach Australia is, you're talking about a whole range of services there, mate. But also you are a network, aren't you, with churches, and what's lovely is the whole support kind of things that you're providing in a whole range of different ways.
Well, one of the
Great.
beauties is we are a network, and in some senses, all our job, like our job as a team, is really promoting what the network is building. So being a repository for it, and then helping communicate it out, release it out in the space. So our conference, which has really been a place where we've had church leaders kind of put their hand up and say, look, hey, we're doing things fairly okay here. We'd love to show you what we do. Have a look under the bonnet of our church. Have a look and and see what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so that kind of generosity, sharing, learning from each other,
Yeah.
that's a key part of how we function as a network. And that generosity, but also that humility to sort of say, look, we've been giving it a go, and we're trying things out, and we'd love you to make new mistakes. Don't make the mistakes that we've made.
Yeah. Mate, I love that. And just going back to the one point you were talking about coaching, I think in the UK that's become something that's been more of an interest in the last few years. It's not something that we've typically done.
Yep.
The church office has been a huge advocate to try and at the point where people hire people and they're doing their contracts and they're sorting out, we're saying, like, put coaching in, we're saying put marriage help in, we're saying put retreats in, reading weeks, like as much detail as we can. Let's put it in there, because when you've been in a post for 4 or 5 years and things are going well, and then you start to need some help in these areas, it's at that point where the church go, well, you've been all right for 4 or 5 years, what, just carry on, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think we've got a culture in church. Yeah, I think we've got a culture in churches where the development of people is happening in our schools, or it's happening in our universities, or happening in our workplaces, and so in some senses we'll get a leader and they'll be ready to go, but we actually don't think about actually what do I need to do to develop them in their current role, but also to step them up into leadership. So we talk about the leadership pipeline in church.
Yeah.
And so if you think about, there's various layers of ministry in church life. You've got people who are serving in teams. You've got people who are leading those teams. You've got others who have been set aside to think about whole ministry areas. And then you've got the senior leadership team, which is thinking about the church as a whole.
Yeah.
Now, the difficulty in church life is that you've often got people exercising those ministry roles and having to take hats off, and they're team members in some contexts and their senior leadership team, because we've got this volunteers and people serving all over the body in different places. And so I don't think we pay attention to actually moving people and developing people in those slots. And often, what it often looks like is a ministry skills development, as
Yeah.
in we'll help you to be good at classroom management and a great kids leader, or we'll help you to run the AV system. But actually, leadership, that's a skill in that area. But leadership is really sort of 70% of the other things. What does it look like to envisage a team? What does it look like to manage, finite resources? What does it look like to um, deal with conflict and build teamwork?
Yeah.
Those skills are transferable at each of those layers. What does it look like to be a good team member, for example?
Yeah.
And we can train and develop those people. So I think that's been one of the mindset shifts that we've tried to help churches have, and to help leaders work out, well, how is it that I actually, through feedback, through on-the-job training,
Yeah.
develop and move people up those leadership layers?
Yeah.
Because if we want to, we need to raise an army.
Yeah.
And we want to have more than just the 20% doing 80% of the work. We want to have a healthy church where 55% or 60% of people are serving and serving in teams. So I think the other thing is that teams mentality is a real principle that we've pushed into as a network. I think often rotors. I think you say rotors rather
Yeah.
than rosters. I think, yeah. I don't know where rotors for me is like a spinny thing on a. But you
Yeah.
say rotors, we say rosters.
Yeah.
You still need rosters to manage people, but it's the mentality of I'm just doing a task and a function as opposed to being on a team. So I think about a welcoming team. Often people are down. I'm on the welcoming team once a month, but actually, if you put yourself in a team
Yeah.
where you're understanding the outcome you want is everyone having a warm welcome to church and us getting people's names and details so we can follow them up, in a timely manner. If that's kind of the outcome we're after, then you're going to be thinking about the food. You're going to be thinking about the in-service welcome. You're going to be thinking about, what's their experience in the car park? What about after church?
Yeah.
You're going to be thinking about that larger outcome. You're going to be thinking about the curtains and the carpet, and there's a whole bunch of things that go to you
Yeah.
feeling comfortable and at ease. And if you hand that over to a team and not just a task, handing out a bulletin, or putting biscuits and a cup of tea on,
Yeah.
you can actually, I think, get people exercising their gifts and actually building a greater welcoming
Yeah.
a greater welcoming church as a result of it. So I think that's a mind shift as well that we
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
make in church life.
I love that yeah, the team versus rota culture is something that we talk about a lot in some of our training and there's a difference, isn't there, being invited to a team than being put on the rota, being sat under a leadership and a leader who's going to go care for people. You're always on team. You just rotated in a certain weeks to serve, I love that stuff. And what I've enjoyed as well in seeing churches established and start to think about this change of mindset is that you give to that team leader and that team a degree of room to bring the strategy and to bring the leadership into that area, which just helps to flourish, doesn't it? And they're working out
Yeah.
what resources they need. They're working out where they need to put the welcome table and what works in terms of snacks and who's coming and what time we need to be there.
And often doing a
I
better
love all
often
that.
doing a better job than the paid
Yeah.
ministry staff, which is a sense of the role of the minister is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. It's
Yeah.
not to be the best at everything. And so in some senses a minister has to cultivate a conscious incompetence is what I
Yeah.
call it.
Yeah.
So I think often we're
Yeah.
unconsciously incompetent, but we actually need to be consciously incompetent. Every time we kind of go and read the book on how to be the best at hospitality, we're actually taking it away from someone else
Yeah.
exercising that gift
Yeah.
or building up the case. We need to learn how to coach them, to ask good questions, to help frame the picture of a biblically welcoming,
Yeah.
loving, generous,
Yeah.
loving one another, gospeling church. Give them that vision,
Yeah.
and then they can work out if you're going to have
Yeah.
a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or
Yeah.
snacks and a crisps or whatever, a sandwich and crisps
Yeah.
for your lunch.
Yeah, I love that. And often I've seen some senior leaders who are saying to me, you're talking about their incompetency and leaving that room. You've got to leave that void for people to be able to go and jump into. And so, there'll be deliberate frustrations that might be left in different ministries and different places where you can go, oh, this leader's just terribly disorganized. But you talk to him and there's some intention behind that and some reasoning behind that. And I love that strategy. And I love the fact that you guys are offering something that's going professional development that makes us think, that helps us with our strategy, helps us with our vision, And often leaders don't get that kind of peer-to-peer challenge, or those different examples that, they're in their churches faithfully preaching the gospel, but can be unaware of, things that they could be doing better. Is that
Yeah,
the
well,
same kind of experience
yeah,
you're getting in churches there? Yeah.
well, I think that's the beauty. So you talked about all the services. We do have a lot of services. We do a lot of things, but at its heart, we're a network of churches that are committed to seeing the gospel go out all across Australia. And so our conference is a real place where leaders get together. We're creating cohorts and
Yeah.
opportunities for that mutual sharing and resourcing, but also that mutual challenge as well. So
Yeah.
that's where the vast sort of network of coaching relationships, probably 350 plus coaching relationships happening across the network. There's that mutual accountability as you're coaching someone. You can't kind of say you really need to have an evangelistic church and not be doing everything you can to have an evangelistic church at your own place. So there's this
Yeah.
mutual kind of learning and sharing, and that I think
Yeah.
my hope is that our network grows from 450 to 550 to 650 to 750 churches, and then we get tipping point and change across Reformed evangelical churches in Australia. Not because um, because not because I want to have the biggest network
Yeah.
by any stretch, but actually there's this real opportunity in the diversity of different churches and different contexts where we actually learn lots about ourselves,
Yeah.
but also learn lots about different contexts, which is a real strength, I think, in our network. Diverse size of churches, and then diverse context of churches, and diverse denominations as well, coming together to see Australia one, which is what we're going to need. We're going to need a diverse body
Yeah.
that
Absolutely right.
doesn't look all sort of worked out and made up if we're going to reach Australia.
Yeah, no, I love that. And if you're listening to the podcast and you're thinking about coaching, and we've been chatting about coaching and the benefits of it, then let me recommend Matt Waldock in the UK, Gospel Coaching. He's
Mm.
fantastic, and a good friend of mine. And I think one of the things he would say is one of the challenges in the UK is there just aren't enough coaches, and encouraging seniors leaders who are coming to the end, or are retiring, who've got more space to actually give themselves and try and envision them to be a coach. And if you're in that situation, listen to the podcast, then get in contact with Matt. I know he's always looking for people to train up, and looking for
Well,
experience.
I'd say don't wait until the end of your ministry. I'd say it's a real key ministry skill that you want to have for all your stuff. So we encourage a lot of our people just to do our level one
Yeah.
online 1 day training, and get equipped just with some of those simple listening skills,
Yeah.
simple framework, simple growth framework. What's the goal? What's the reality? What's the outcome or the objectives that we're moving forwards, and then just wrap it up. What are going to be the next steps? I'm going to keep you accountable. So
Yeah.
I just think everyone in ministry can learn that simple coaching framework, because
Yeah.
they're the sorts of discipleship conversations you want to be having. You can be using it for the person who's wrestling with a porn addiction, or the person who's struggling to know what to do with their time, or struggling with their home group, and a loud person or a quiet person. Those coaching conversations, I think, should be happening all across
Yeah.
church life. And again, we're on the same page as Matt in terms of that gospel coaching. A one-on-one intentional conversation that pushes into someone's personal, relational, spiritual, missional lifestyle. So yeah,
Good
Matt's
stuff,
an
isn't it?
excellent leader up
Yeah.
at City Church Manchester. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So please go and check that out, and I'll stick it in the show notes for you as a link. Scott, one of the things I want to chat to you about is just one of the things that we've found working with churches here. When we use the word vision with churches, they feel a little bit uncomfortable, and I don't know whether because you're ahead of us in thinking these things and working with leaders, getting leaders to use different kind of language to help them think about, right, what has God called us to do in this local church? Because we would understand our mission as being Matthew 28, go make disciples,
Mm.
take this good news of Jesus out there. That's our mission. We're common across every church. But that sense of vision of what God's called us to our church, the language around that, I find leaders will get a bit twitchy and go, "Oh, I'm not sure I want to go and have a conversation." Tell me a little bit about your experience in that, and how you
Yeah.
have overcome a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think well, a couple of things. I mean, I don't want to speak for those leaders who you talk about who are twitchy, but I think part of one of the kind of well, a couple of pushbacks we get would be, I can't control that outcome. So I
Okay.
don't want to, I don't want to cast that vision, because that's not something I control. It's God who brings the growth.
Yeah.
1 Corinthians 3, it's
Absolutely right.
he's the one who's going to be doing the change life. So I don't want to cast this vision that's there. I think we've overreacted to Pentecostalism, charismatic, and the
Yeah.
triumphalism that they have,
Yeah.
that they sometimes have in their world. And so we've said, well, we don't want to paint that bigger picture, because we don't want to wear people out, and that's not who we are.
Yeah.
We're the reasonable people. And then I think the third one is, that I see, um, is, I've got the business. I've caught the kind of business idea of that. So I'm looking for the sharp, pithy one sentence that I'm going to say. We're all about, gathering, growing, and going, and I've got to nail that. And I actually don't think that's helpful either. So I talk about having I call it a wonder document.
Yeah.
Um, and by one, I'm just kind of using the Lencioni language of sort of working
Yeah.
Jesus genius. But the idea of, you need to be thinking kind of 5 years, 10 years. You need to be thinking about, well, what might church look like? Again, it's not a plan. We're not saying it'll happen, but what might it look like if we grow over the next few years and see growth in our evening congregation, or if we start an evening congregation, or if we start another morning service? What's it going to look like if we're full in this building? What's it going to look like then for my staff team, for the finances that we're going to need,
Yeah.
for you? That's where Keller's paper on growth is really helpful. I think it really thinks about the personal,
Yeah.
the personal change that happens as you move from a small to a medium to a large.
Yeah.
And that wonder is not constraining God, or not constraining us, but it's saying, hey, we'd love to see more people wonder Jesus.
Yeah.
Let's start to think about the implications of that, which then allow us to plan and think, okay, well, we are going to need to think about a bigger building, or we are going to need to think about extra staff, or we're actually going to need to think about being intentional about, putting things on. And so I talk about your vision document almost being, what's the picture, that kind of God has given you in your ministry context and with the people that you have in front of you. It's not something you can rinse and repeat from somewhere else. It's something that you have to own, and um, and get a vision and a fire,
Yeah. Yeah.
and a fire for.
Yeah.
So so
Yeah.
I'm all about that. Here, let's hear the stories of people who are growing and in their walk with Jesus. Let's hear the stories of life transformation as someone's moved from death to life. Let's hear the people who are stepping up and being generous, and stepping up and jumping into ministry. Those are the sort of pictures that build. This is the kind of church
Yeah.
that we want to be, and that we're on about.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's a pithy one-liner. I actually think it's about thinking about your ministry context, and painting that picture regularly. And you wanted to be doing that regularly
Yeah.
in your small group, in your one-on-ones, in your big picture. So we talk about having kind of like a 6-minute vision, talk,
Yeah.
a 3-minute vision talk, and then having your elevator pitch as well,
Yeah.
so that if someone tells you about your church, you can quickly talk about it. So my church, Vine Church in Sydney, we're all about the life, love, and freedom that's found in Jesus.
Yeah.
There's my short. Now, if I give you a bigger picture, we've got a pub that's at the back of our church. It's called the Beresford. On a Saturday night, it probably has 1,000 people. We love our church. We love
I
our
love
church
that.
to be as full as that. And at the moment, we're 2 or 3 congregations. We're about 350, 450 people. Well, we love to have as many people that are, you know, having fun on a Saturday night, in church on a Sunday. And so that's our vision. And as I think about those 1,000 people, that's only a small drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
There's 200,000 people within a 5-minute walk of us,
Yeah.
and we'd love to see thousands. So let's start there. It's shared. It's credible. We've all had a drink at the Beresford. We've all had a counter meal.
Yeah.
We kind of can see and
Yeah.
experience what 1,000 people would look like.
Yeah.
And then we can start thinking, well, that's 4 congregations of 250 people on a Sunday.
Yeah.
That's a full church on Sunday that's just seeing the gospel being preached and won. So there's no pithy one-liner there. There's a picture of healthy biblical
Yeah.
gospel proclaiming
Yeah.
community that's loving one another and gospeling one another every week.
Yeah.
And being this beautiful picture in a dark place,
Yeah.
that is inner city Sydney.
I
Yeah.
love that. And I was working with a church the other day who was saying, "Oh, we don't really have vision," and I attended their prayer meeting. You're listening to how they're praying. You take a look at their budget and their finances, and you can start to see actually what someone's passionate about, what their church vision is from, their
Yep.
finances, their staff roles, how these things align together, and and I was starting to communicate and just kind of sound back some of the things that I was seeing. I was like, "Oh yeah, well that is actually what we're about. That is actually." Our vision, but they hadn't kind of put it into that kind of framework, into that go, right, this is what we're trying to do. And you're right, it's God who brings about vision, isn't it? We can't bring about vision. But yet, what are we praying for? What are we believing? What are we hoping that God is going to do amongst us? And I've loved churches who have been on that journey of say, we want our church to grow in hospitality and welcome people in so we can share the gospel. And you go, right, well, that's like your vision. And then how do we work back from that? And what's our strategy? What's our leadership? What's our teams? And once people start on that journey, I think they start to engage with it. But it's just like vision is business. I don't need to get involved in that. I don't need that. We've got a clear mission, so I'm happy. But challenging that mindset is so important, isn't it? I think.
And you kind of, I like to put I guess I like to put a number on it, or paint a
Yeah,
picture of growth and size. Partly so I can then work back and think, well, what does that look like for, how many people are going to be there on Sunday, and in our small group ministry, what does that look like for our welcoming structures? We're going to,
yeah,
for a church of 500, we're probably going to be welcoming 500, people a year and wanting to follow them up. So in painting that picture, I'm happy to put a number again.
yeah,
A number often that's bigger than what we are, and it's painting a picture that's going to require to get us uncomfortable,
yeah,
and push us, out of our comfort
yeah, yeah,
zone,
yeah, yeah,
as well. I think we're often we're uncomfortable doing that,
yeah,
but you can see, 1,000 people in the Beresford, and having 1,000. Like I just go, I love that number. That
yeah,
that means I'm going to give to the building project. That means that I'm going to, work hard to be a welcoming church member each
yeah.
week, as we see new people enfolded in church life. It really kind of, drives and, helps shape that picture.
Scott, we can't go on from this podcast without talking about this pub then. I mean, English
Oh,
people love
okay,
a good
okay.
pub. So how on earth
Well,
did you
this
get
is
a
this is
pub in
like a
your
big gay,
church?
yeah. This is a big gay and lesbian pub in Sydney. So my church is at the end of the Mardi Gras. So
Right.
so picture rainbow flags,
Yeah.
and but on a Tuesday night steak deal, only $25 for a beer and a steak. It's
Yeah.
great. It's got a beautiful outdoor courtyard. In Australia, we do pubs outside because the weather's pretty
Okay.
much,
Yeah.
good
Nice.
24/7, 365 days a year. So
Yeah, it's pouring with rain here, mate. And you were saying, oh, it's a bit chilly with 21 degrees just today. Yeah, slight difference.
no,
Yeah.
summer's fine. Well, spring's finally landed. We've had 3 weeks of rain, and the last 3 days have been sunshine, and yeah,
Yeah.
my grass is growing again. I'm happy.
He's a
So
happy
yeah.
man. He's a happy man. Scott, love talking to you and, just similar passions, similar things, and I've got a real heart to serve churches, come alongside and encourage. And
Mm.
the ministry that you guys are doing, what you're doing in churches is fantastic. And the resources that are coming out and that people can access is tremendous. Give us a quick ending on, I know you do a podcast and you've got some other things. Give us a couple of things that
Yep.
people can go hook into, and even though it's a different context, there's stuff here that we can all learn from. Yeah, fire away at that.
Yeah, well, jump onto our online resource library. What we've tried to do there is to have as many Australian voices as possible speak into church life. So it's yeah. There's a whole bunch of audio resources to listen to. There's also a bunch of ebooks in some of the key outcome areas in church life. We've just released a new book on buildings and thinking about buildings, and having a ministry plan that actually drives your building and ministry strategy, which is, it's often the other way around. It's buildings that drive your ministry strategy, and that shouldn't be the way.
Yeah.
And then our One Thing podcast. Well, I always say, look, my mum's listening to it, and it's always good if a couple of other people are listening to it as well. But One Thing podcast, 15-minute podcast designed to give you one thing, one gospel-centered ministry tip each week. So again, really useful to have people who have a passion to see the church grow, and the promise is 15 minutes, and
Yeah.
you'll get that one tip. So head to the One Thing podcast on Apple
Yeah, be on all
or
the
your
platforms.
podcast or your podcast app. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah, that's good. And then also just want to highlight as well, Richard Cokin and Reach Ministries UK. This is a place where you can go and get really practical, face-to-face help. I know they're already started doing loads of coaching. They've got some
They've got
cohorts.
great to consult. Yeah, great consults they're already doing, and and then ministry clinics as well that Richard's been leading as well. And the conference, again, I think conferences are, you just want to keep pushing into the conference and making that like a must thing for your team every year to get along to. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the church office is kind of linked up with Reach UK, and I've become one of the consultants on there, and again working on this kind of admin and ops area, particularly coming alongside leaders in that. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can access here in the UK, which is great. Scott, brilliant stuff that you guys are doing. Love the fact that we can partner with you and just hear your heart, and just even the content of this podcast will be a blessing to people. So, mate, thanks for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate your time.
Awesome. No worries, Gav. Really, thankful for your ministry in the UK and looking forward to partnering in the future.
Yeah, it's great. Excellent. Well, if you've got any questions, anything you'd like to follow up with Scott or I, then please get in contact at questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. We've got a whole bunch of new things happening. We've got a good church management course that we're launching in November, which you might want to access and have a look at. We're also doing back office reviews and continue to try and serve churches in that behind the scenes ministry stuff. So if you're coming and listening to the podcast thinking, right, I could do with some help, or we can connect you to Matt and gospel coaching and all the things that we've chatted about today, please press into us and reach out to us at info@thechurchoffice.co.uk. Check out our website for upcoming resources. Our heart is to bless you and to serve you in your ministry behind the scenes. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you, Scott, and we'll see you next time on the Church Office podcast. Goodbye.